Hello and welcome to what I'm pretty sure will be my final video for the 2022 Burial Rites season. I am looking a little damp because I just went for a swim, but I just couldn't wait any longer and I needed to film this video. So I'm going to be talking about 5 of my favourite quotes from Burial Rites that have something to do with Margret. And by something to do with Margret, I mean these are either things that she says or they are quotes that I believe represent her character really well and thus are really helpful for the exam. So the first quote that I'm going to be talking about, I don't know why I keep showing off the book. Like, this is what the novel looks like. You all know what the novel looks like at this point. So the first quote I'm going to be talking about is on page 20, and it's after Margret and Jon have had a little discussion about getting more cows, and Jon says, "In good time, Margret, love," and Margret says, "In good time, I'll be dead." Now I like this quote because I think it's a really good example of foreshadowing, because we know that she spends the novel quite unwell. It links in really nicely to that "two dying women" quote, and characterizes her really well in, you know, it's only page 20 and I feel like we already understand her attitude in a pretty strong way. My next favourite is on page 24, so not too many pages later, and Laura has just let her mum know that she doesn't want to distress her, and Margret says, "Oh, I am often distressed." So I think that this would be a really good quote to use when looking at Margret's character, because often distressed is quite easy to remember, but also she identifies as being distressed, so she isn't happy with the way in which her life is at this point. And the reason why I bring that up is because later in the novel she talks about liking having Agnes around because it's nice to have an extra set of hands, and again, it's almost like foreshadowing, and it shows the calmness that Agnes eventually brings for Margret, and the way in which Margret benefits from Agnes, which is a really interesting way to look at the text. And I was saying this to some of you the other day, I think an essay question that I would really like is how the family members at Cornsa are impacted by Agnes, rather than how Agnes is impacted by them. I think that would be really interesting. But yeah, that's why I like that quote. Number 3 is again not soon after, so I quite like a lot of early days Margret quotes because they are so nicely juxtaposed with things she says at the end of the novel. But when the officers have brought Agnes to the family at Cornsa and she is there for the first time, Agnes is in handcuffs, okay? And Margret says, "Is it necessary to keep her bound like a lamb ripe for slaughter?" I love this quote for a couple of different reasons. You know, I love the animalistic metaphors in the novel, and this is something that I refer to quite often and I think is really good for analysis. So I like that Margret is part of introducing this. But what I like is that we see that she is a good person, and this is early in the novel. This is around the time when she wouldn't even say Agnes's name, but she still wants her to have humanity. So I feel like Margret always was out there trying to humanize Agnes, whether it was washing her clothes or wanting her to not be bound like a lamb for slaughter. Margret always saw Agnes as a human, and I think that this is a good example of that. I've just now realised that I have 6, and I don't know how that happened. On page 51 and 52, so it goes over the page, Margret is thinking about Agnes and she's really trying to understand her, and she says she thinks, "What kind of a woman kills men?" The only murderess Margret had known were the women in the sagas, and even then it was with words that they had killed men, orders given to servants to slay lovers or avenge the death of kin. And I don't even like that quote just because it has the word slay in it. I like it because it references the sagas, and I think it's so interesting that Margret clearly has a deep knowledge of the sagas, but we maybe don't realize that. And Agnes's intellect and her knowledge of the sagas is so overt, whereas Margret's is a little more concealed, but it shows that maybe that's why the two are able to connect. They clearly have similar hobbies and things that they like, and it also shows the depth to Margret, which I really enjoy. But also it's a good representation of gender because she's straight up questioning what sort of a woman kills men, which is very interesting in my opinion. 155 sees Margret being referred to as having acidity and forthrightness. And I like this because I think that those are two really interesting words that if you use them, your marker is going to be really impressed that you've used that quote from the novel, and also it shows the complexity of Margaret's character. Now, Margaret is friends with somebody whose name is Ingeborg. I know there are multiple Ingeborgs, and this doesn't matter. You don't have to memorize this, but basically it's talking about Margaret hanging out with her gal pals. And Ingeborg has none of Margaret's acidity or her forthrightness. The two women were fast friends. So it shows that Margaret can be friends with people that are not exactly like her. Again, perhaps foreshadowing her friendship with Agnes, but also it just shows us about her personality. Acidity is such an interesting way to describe one's demeanor, and also forthrightness. I think that encapsulates Margaret so well. She is incredibly forthright, and I like that is a quote that you could use from the text. Finally, I have a quote from 201, and I really like this quote because it brings in so many different concepts and also characters as well. So it's around the time that Agnes has helped with Rosalind's birth, like Rosalind birthing her child, not Rosalind's birth. That would be a weird timeline. And you know, Agnes is being quite humble about it. And it says, Margaret wondered at how, even for an hour, Agnes had seemed part of the family. And I love that because it's that first inkling that the two of them are forming a connection, and Margaret is admitting that Agnes felt part of the family, even if it was just for an hour. I think that is really quite beautiful. Of course, I love when Margaret calls Agnes my girl. I love that. Okay, fine. I'll include it. 7 quotes. Love that a lot. So those are 7 of my favorite Margaret quotes. If I didn't include yours, maybe you could make your own one of these videos. Wouldn't that be fun? Or not? Let me know. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you very soon, and I can't wait to hear how amazingly you all do in your exams. Bye!